Alrighty. Hey guys, thanks for watching this Western Pacific weather update. Actually, this is a new show we're going to be putting together here for those of you who just like talking about weather out here in the Western Pacific and Eastern Asia. Not particularly pertaining to current events, even though maybe some of the episodes we might be talking about that, but more or less controversial events or topics or anything like that out here, and educational stuff as well. The name of the show is actually called the Wonderful World of Weather. Jonathan, who's joining us here, actually made that name up. You guys go ahead and introduce yourself here, and most people know who you are anyways, but yeah.
Mike, you go first.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Mike Adcock, I'm a meteorologist here in northern Japan.
Hi, I'm Jonathan O. I am a meteorologist, also in Tokyo. I'm just thinking, like, how would I introduce myself? I work with Robert, actually, when it comes to the job of broadcasting on television with the weather. But, yeah, I'm also a weather nerd.
Yay.
All right. So, yeah, so basically this is kind of just a laid-back, casual type approach to these updates, and really we're just going to be talking about certain things, and today the big thing that we're talking about is who is the official typhoon agency. Everybody knows that this is kind of a hot topic out here in the Western Pacific, and one of the main reasons for that is because there are numerous typhoon agencies. Actually, take a look at the Typhoon Committee. I don't know if people can really see this, but there's at least 10 to 12 members of the Typhoon Committee, and not to mention the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, who as well is a very active member in forecasting typhoons, and many people swear up and down by them. They are pretty good at what they do. Unfortunately, they do have some drawbacks, being the fact that they don't warn on local warnings. They don't talk about storm surge. They are specifically for the military and operational impact, so unless you're not part of the military, they're not very useful as far as impacts on yourself. But unfortunately, most of the other agencies also have some significant drawbacks too. Unfortunately, I was hoping to get some more diversified opinions here. I think the three of us kind of agree, but we also do kind of disagree on some things. So, you guys want to jump in? What are your thoughts on, for example, if you were to open up your internet right now, you had a typhoon headed towards your house, what's the first site you go to?
Personally, I go to JMA's site. I go to the Japan Meteorological Agency site. That's the first stop I go to. So that gives me the information straight off. Progressing from that, model checks. Sometimes I'll check the Joint Typhoon Warning Center after that. But a lot of times, the local agencies I don't check nearly as frequently unless it's something that's about to make landfall. So.
How about you, Mike?
I'm one of those. Me personally, I really love information. I want to get everybody's opinion. I do this even with my with the forecasters that I work with. I value everybody's inputs. And I'm kind of more of a probabilistic forecaster. I want to get kind of an ensemble type look. So the way I approach, if there is a typhoon or a storm rolling my way, I want to get everybody's opinion, me personally. I do follow JMA probably at more so than others, just because I realize that they are the official agency here in the Western Pacific. But I do follow the other agencies pretty closely because, in my perspective, I kind of, at least for a track, I want to see what everybody else is seeing. I want to see, are they picking up on a weakness in a trough, and at that point I can start kind of building that probabilistic forecast of, I'm trying to remember, there was a storm earlier this season that was approaching the Philippines, and there was a huge divergence in the tracks from all the agencies. And it was interesting seeing that and seeing, well, this group of forecasters are thinking, the storm will recurve earlier, where these folks don't think it, and at that point you're just throwing odds in, and that's really what I'm kind of looking at is, what are my best odds. So I do like looking at all of them, but in terms of like an intensity and all that sort of stuff, I kind of keep it simple and I just keep it with JMA.
All right. Hey guys, I actually got a pretty serious question here, and we're recording this live and watching for the playback. If anybody's watching, and if you guys want to check it, are you getting this "please stand by" bar in the middle of the video? Because I have a feeling everybody else is getting it too.
On
our
on
live,
YouTube,
yeah, on our YouTube.
it's coming in clear here.
Okay, perfect. All right, this is just my computer. All right, fantastic. I'm getting this. Actually, I'll put it up on my screen here. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about before we get in there, so people aren't a little bit confused of what I'm mentioning. This is what I'm getting coming across the screen, and I'm like, I hope everybody else isn't seeing the same thing. So there's a quirk, and this is why this is episode 1 of this show, and we're trying to get some of those quirks out of the way first. So that is something I have never seen before. Anyhow.
I mean, I just checked that it's working fine too. So congratulations, you're broadcasting and you're having issues with it looping back to your own computer.
Yeah, well. So yeah, thanks for everybody else. I put a comment on the chat there on the YouTube channel. Somebody else might not be thinking, what is he talking about? So that's why I just showed that. Anyways, back to the topic at hand here. So yeah, you check most of the different agencies, kind of match them up together. Is there any particular one that you would lean towards? And also the other big thing is, let's say there is a storm just about to make landfall. For example, and this is always a big topic in the Philippines, for example, we have a storm just about to make landfall. Now, are you going to solely say, okay, we're going to go with PAGASA, because a lot of PAGASA swears up and down that you don't check any other agency when it comes there, and they're key in making the local warnings, so I can't blame them for doing that. Unfortunately, sometimes their warnings are off, sometimes other agencies' warnings are off, so you try to match them up or try to compare as far as making a local forecast. But what are your guys' thoughts on that? If let's say we have a storm which is about to make landfall in Visayas. JMA says it's going to turn north towards Luzon. PAGASA says down towards Mindanao. Are you going to kind of average it out, maybe look at one agency, or try to look at the different models? I'm just curious. What are your guys' thought process behind that? Or are you going with the one that makes more sense to you?
I think personally, because I'm a meteorologist, I can make my own forecasts by going along and viewing what the local agency is saying and what the regional specialized meteorological center is saying. Many times, I guess, to keep the message as clear and as consistent as possible. Now, if we're talking about something that's totally divergent from each other, I then try to focus less on the specific track and be a little more broad-brushed in terms of the impacts, because so many times we're so focused on that center point of where it's going to be landing that people completely forget that this storm is not a point on a map. It's much larger than a point on the map. And that uncertainty, and I think this is another thing that we, in our technology and in our progression of the meteorological field, so many times we're so worried about precision as opposed to the impacts and even the accuracy per se, because we're saying we've got to know exactly at what hour, what time is going to be at what specific geographical location. While those things are certainly important, because that's what a forecast is supposed to do, it's supposed to give you more specific information about how this impact is going to arrive, sometimes we're so focused on that much detail that we're shooting ourselves in the foot by leaving out the impacts on a much broader scale. And so if it's hugely divergent, then I'll be a little more broad brushing in terms of how to explain it, because I don't want to discount the scenarios. But otherwise, I personally usually lean closer toward JMA's forecasts, and I try to keep it at least consistent with them, since they are more responsive on a broader scale for this particular region. And I think that's probably the approach that I would take, but that's assuming that the forecast tracks are very similar and that the forecast, based on what I was able to see through the modeling data and from the process of what's happening over the Western Pacific, that's how I would come to that particular conclusion.
Now, actually, that brings up a big point as well with me. If we're talking about near landfall, you're saying the exact track, and a lot of people do get quite focused on that fact. Like, where is the storm making landfall? And we always get that question. All three of us have gotten that question before. Is the storm going to be making landfall near my house? And sometimes it doesn't matter. If you get for example, a storm that's kind of a monsoonal gyre type of system, and the center of circulation's far away from your home, that actually might be worse because you're going to get those winds far away from the center of circulation. So I think sometimes we do get drawn into that center line, and that is one reason why I like using agencies like JTWC. They're very good, but they're kind of misleading in that aspect sometimes, because we have seen some storms where they show the center line and then they say winds 140 knots, for example, but it doesn't really specify what the impacts are going to be on a specific location. And that's why I always stress, let's say we got a storm making landfall in the Philippines, we got a storm making landfall in Japan, ensure that you are going to be using the local agency and the local warning. Somebody's going to be joining in with us here. Ray, hi, nice to see you there.
Hey, hello.
Hey, Ray.
Hi.
For anybody who don't know, Ray is part of the Pacific Typhoon group, and yeah, thanks for joining in. We're actually talking right now about, and if you want to watch on the YouTube channel there, about we're actually talking right now about basically if a storm's making landfall in a specific area, what agency do you kind of lean towards? And I always say the home countries. Okay, I'm gonna you Ray there for a second. Always the home country agency, and a lot of people actually don't realize it, but a lot of people say JMA is not really good on specific type of impact information, but they actually do put out a lot of impact information, probably the same amount that the NHC does in the U.S. Unfortunately, for most of us, it's in Japanese, so you kind of got to search for it on their website. I do have to admit, though, NHC probably one of the best, because it doesn't matter where a storm in the Atlantic is hitting. If it's in Cuba, they still put out impact information, which, unlike JMA, if it's storms hitting in the Philippines, they don't. They say this is how strong the winds are going to be and basically where it's going. Mike, what is your thoughts on that?
You know, you actually hit on something that I really feel strongly about. I really like how the National Hurricane Center and that region handles it, because I mean, kind of comparing apples and oranges to a degree, but I mean, they utilized one key agency, and then from there, the smaller agencies still issue their own information, but they use the parent organization's forecast. For example, National Hurricane Center, they issue the track. Well, the Canadian Hurricane Center, they still issue their own products tailored for the country, but they're still, maintaining that one voice. In terms of, if I look at this from an emergency manager's aspect, you do kind of want to get that one voice out there. It does come across, we've heard it in the Philippines where a storm's getting ready to make landfall, and I'm seeing on national TV where we're talking about the JTWC forecast track and the JMA forecast track and the PAGASA forecast track, and the focus is on the differences. That kind of takes away from the message. So I do think it's important to have that one voice. Now, I think from a relaying the information from a TV meteorologist's point of view, that's where you try to balance it and you give as much local impact information, and staying away from the track is going to go at this particular location. You just want to detail the risks associated for the individual locations. I mean, does it really matter particularly exactly where that typhoon is going to make landfall? It's more important on what are the impacts going to be felt like across. The storm system is pretty large. It's not one point on the map. So yeah, I do feel it's important to try to keep one voice, whether you're talking about the track or just talking about the impacts. But I think the impact should really be focused on the local areas, and then letting the synoptic scale picture, the track information, let that be handled by the regional center.
Robert, if I may add to that also, and agree with that. I think the challenge of the Western Pacific, though, is the fact that there are so many countries. When the National Hurricane Center really only has to worry about Cuba, Mexico, and Canada as really the other countries that are involved. And since the U.S., in terms of its coverage area, is so much larger, it's not as big of a deal I don't say politically in terms of like government politics, but just the politics behind the forecast because since you have much fewer, it's much easier to coordinate conference calls and be able to discuss these things as they're producing this information. I think that's the challenge of having Japan dealing with so many more countries in this area and trying to coordinate all of that into essentially placing those eggs in one basket when it comes to that big parent track. And I can see why the local agencies will have some reservations with that. Be that as it may be one of a more olive branch kind of approach to this. And I think that JMA has kind of already done this, that, yes, there's a centered track of these circles that they put out with their forecasts, but they said this is a range, and there is a possibility that the the typhoon can vary in its track within these circles. We put that out there because of the probability concerns that we have. And so using that as an olive branch, saying this is the big picture that we're going for, not the actual line, but the big picture that we're going for, and then helping to relay that communication and also helping ways to incorporate other forecasters in their thought process into bring that one message, I think will be much more effective than what we have right now, which almost seems like there's forecaster over here in one corner, another one over there, another one over there, and they're not really talking to each other nearly as effectively. So now we've got all these tracks, and as Mike has said, now the highlight becomes about, well, they said this and we said this, but I just prefer this. And so now the people at home, instead of going for what may be more scientifically sound, it's more like, well, because they're in my backyard, I'd rather follow them kind of process, and that doesn't really help out with dealing with, again, the impact, the scope of what the typhoon can do, rather than where the particular line is on this particular course.
Now, here is something else that I kind of want to put in, and actually, I should have pulled up that graphic. Remember I made a graphic a couple months ago showing, because JMA's aspect for their forecasting is the entire Western Pacific, but each other country actually has their own area of responsibility. There's only one agency that actually follows that area of responsibility rule, though, is PAGASA. But for example, Malaysia is only supposed to warn on storms near Malaysia. Korea is only supposed to warn on storms near Korea. All of them do. So I think that's also something that kind of, and Ray, you can jump in on this. Ray, you're in the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
And you can jump in on this and let me know your thought, because when we get these storms that form way out, maybe around the Marshall Islands, south of Guam, it's out of the Philippine area responsibility. And the Philippines, being the only country that actually follows the rule about warning inside their local area box, I think that sometimes, as far as media is concerned, you can't really. You have to talk about this storm. If you don't, somebody else is going to talk about it. And who's putting out those forecast tracks? JTWC and JMA. And then when it gets closer to the Philippines, we're still using the JTW, but we're also comparing it to PAGASA. And I think that's something else that it's one of those problems out here. There's so many different warning agencies. Some people warn on the storms and others don't. For example, though, Ray, if let's say the storm, it's about to hit a week from now, what's the track the media typically puts on the TV there?
Based on what I'm observing for probably in the past few years, the Philippine media has been using forecast tracks, particularly from PAGASA, which is, of course, the Philippines official weather agency. But sometimes if, for example, I could remember the forecast from Typhoon Haiyan just 2 years ago, even if PAGASA hasn't issued the official warning before the storm entered the Philippine area responsibility, sometimes the media use the JTWC forecast and also the JMA forecast to know where Typhoon Haiyan will head towards the Philippines just a few days before it made landfall in the eastern portion of Visayas. And another thing here is that we know that PAGASA's use the Philippine Area Responsibility. This is their area where they can issue official warnings whenever a typhoon enters the Philippine Area Responsibility. But it depends on if I could understand how PAGASA works. If PAGASA will monitor a storm, if there's a if there's a high probability of entering the Philippine Area Responsibility, sometimes they may issue advance warnings even if the storm will enter the Philippine Area Responsibility. I think that what I have observed for quite some time.
Actually, I have seen them do that before too, and I think that's actually fairly smart, especially when you're starting to see media kind of pull up on other agencies across this area.
Here's something that, I mean, this is within a single country, so this is not going to be particularly helpful at this point, but let me say that one of the things that the U.S. has done very well within its own country is, for example, when you have convective storms, you've got an overall agency responsible for issuing products when it comes to storms that pop up, but then you have the local offices that they're responsible for issuing watches and warnings. Specifically, the SPC, for example, the Storm Prediction Center, does not issue watches and warnings. They'll issue discussions. They'll issue concerns. But only the local agency is responsible for doing that. And I wonder if maybe while each country does have their area of responsibility and should be doing that, in order to help simplify the information, make sure that the main focus of those concerns deal with warning the people and letting them know what is happening in terms of impacts without having 10 agencies in the same area, all across the Western Pacific issuing 10 different tracks.
And I think that's what the WMO was going for when they made this little graph here, or the warning areas, because it says RSMC Tokyo there, but what they're saying is that when you get a storm within the specific areas of vice, which actually I found this is what I was talking about. When you get a storm inside these specific areas, they're supposed to issue warnings within that area. Not so much to track. Now, I think the agencies issue the tracks because, I mean, you kind of have to, maybe, but I think it's kind of the important information is getting lost in the mix of the different tracks out here, and it also goes back to, well, I guess, who is the official typhoon agency.
I mean, not to do the whole, what goes on in the Atlantic should be what goes on in the Pacific, but I'm going to. But I'm going to do it anyway. But I mean, I think that's exactly the point that I think they've got a system that I believe the WMO was wanting to go to, and it works. I mean, we talk about the number of countries that that Tokyo handles and that Miami handles, and you look at it, there are a lot of small island nations that have their own meteorology departments across the Caribbean and in Central America. Looking at just raw numbers, I mean, the Western Pacific and the Atlantic Basin are actually about similar in terms of number of countries. Now, with regards to the National Hurricane Center, they reach out, they go, okay, here's the forecast track, they coordinate, they have their conference calls with these various the various agencies, and that's where they fine-tune the track. Okay, so a hurricane's getting ready to make landfall. They reach out, they talk to, Cuba, for instance. They coordinate that, and Cuba thinks, well, based off of this, we would like to shift the track a little bit further west. Much like, Jonathan was talking about the Storm Prediction Center, they do the same thing when they reach out to the forecast offices. They make those minor tweaks to the track. The warning responsibility still remains with those countries. Cuba will issue, if you read the National Hurricane Center bulletins, they will say that they coordinated the government of Cuba or the government of Jamaica has issued a tropical storm warning for Jamaica, and go on, so on and so forth. And I really think that's where we need to lean toward in the Western Pacific, where JMA is the conduit of information. Everybody coordinates through them. They make the track, they tweak it around, and then the various agencies, that's where they take, PAGASA, they take that information, they tailor it to the customers. They issue, okay, we're going to issue a Typhoon watch or whatever the case may be, and we go from there. I think the other issue that we run into is in the Atlantic, we have a very standardized watch and warning process that's outlined in the National Hurricane Operations Plan, where this is what a hurricane warning means. These sort of winds in this amount of time, whereas we don't have that in the Western Pacific. We have typhoon warnings, which means totally different things. In Japan, we've got storm signals. In Hong Kong, we've got color codes. In China, we've got storm signals in the Philippines, and they're completely different. And I think that's something what we can approach is trying to get that warning process solidified and get everybody on the same sheet of music. Because really, at this point, we're getting very redundant in our process here across the Western Pacific. These countries can actually save a lot of time and money if we consolidate efforts.
Actually, that is extremely true, and it's not. That is such a great point because it's so hard to explain to people, and not even the warnings, but the scales are different with every country too, which blows my mind. You say it's a super typhoon, and it's like, well, per who? Did you mean per PAGASA, China?
It isn't GMA.
Yeah, JMA doesn't use it, but JMA's violent typhoon is the exact same thing as China's super typhoon, and then I think it would be, and then even inside Japan, because we have a lot of military that kind of follow and along with stuff, is that JMA and the U.S. military have two totally different warning systems, and sometimes it seems like they don't even talk to each other because, for example, Nakri last year. You remember that one? That we had tropical storm or typhoon warnings in effect for Okinawa, and the military was like, "There's no typhoon."
Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh gee whiz.
So
nothing to see here.
Yeah, exactly. And then when a typhoon hit, everybody was like, "Hey, what's happening?"
Just a little wind, nothing to see here. Keep pressing on.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
And as Ray, you probably know the same thing too in the Philippines, because the Philippines is also, and this goes along the line of different warnings. The Philippines has different names, and their name pops up as a tropical depression. So that, yeah.
Yeah, it's confusing too. I tell you that, especially when you have other agencies you have to consider besides PAGASA, especially here in the Philippines, because I usually experience a lot of confusion in terms, for example, in terms of intensity of the typhoon. One example for that is Typhoon Bopha, which is Typhoon Pablo, when it struck Mindanao in 2012. At the time, I had a little confusion in terms of intensity-wise. For example, Pablo had peak winds of 175 kilometers per hour, while JTWC had winds probably about 260 kilometers per hour. So I'm starting to get a little, there's some conservatism. I don't know what I have to say, but I think what it's trying to say is that PAGASA is, I think they're using a different scale, am I right, in terms, for example, the winds is a 10-minute average by PAGASA, while GTWC had a 1-minute average. So there's a huge difference in terms of wind speed. So maybe that's the reason why at the time in my hometown we were only just under a signal force, signal number 3, where I would think that it should be at signal number 4 or even signal number 5 because of in terms of the intensity of the typhoon, especially from JTWC. That's why we have as a person who monitors typhoons, especially here in the Philippines. That's caused a lot of confusion for many people, especially when we check to other agencies besides PAGASA.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, and a lot of people don't realize that most of the agencies they sometimes the winds actually do match up. Specifically, JMA and JTWC, that's a big thing. JMA uses a 10-minute wind scale, and JTWC uses a 1-minute wind scale. So if you actually do the math, they're saying the exact same winds based on the Dvorak analysis, but they use a different. But explaining that to most people, and I think that gets lost in translation sometimes with the media when you start comparing agencies, and that goes back to the fact that you kind of have to point out the impacts. But that's a really good point.
Too many numbers confuse people. We barely can get. Here's the thing. Even in the States, you tell somebody we are under a tornado watch or we are under a tornado warning, and people hear tornado watch and they're going, "Oh my goodness, we're going to see a tornado." It's like, no. It's a tornado watch. We just think the ingredients are there. We're not saying it's going to happen, but because I mean, even a basic thing like that. So when you start throwing out all these different numbers and all these different categories and different people get confused, and I mean, we have to simplify it. Not because people are not intelligent, they are, but if you tell them 10 different things, it's going to be confusing. Period. And so, I think that there is a strong need to align things that can be aligned. Put aside the differences of, well, we want the word super in the title, or we want violent in there. Instead of being picky about those things, let's get together on simplifying the categories and the requirements and the expectations so that our focus can be more placed on telling people when something bad is about to go down.
And that goes back to the Typhoon Committee, which they meet once a year. They're supposed to talk these things over, but I'm not a personal viewer of the Typhoon Committee, so I wouldn't know. I hope it's not anything political, is why we are not on the same page. I agree with you that it really needs to be much more simpler. And I think PAGASA, for example, has undergone some awesome improvements in the past.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they're really improved, but still, as Jonathan just mentioned, their warning system is changing a lot. And it's getting more complicated. They're adding the signal force plus the storm surge warnings plus, and it's great. It's very detailed, and if you follow the warnings and you know what it is, it's awesome. But it can get confusing for some people. And
yeah, I would say I would remind one thing here. You know, typhoons have different hazards, especially rain, strong winds, and storm surge. That's why here in the Philippines, PAGASA has issued a lot of warnings as every time when a typhoon comes on shore in a particular area. That's why they have those rainfall, heavy rainfall, red warnings, for example, signal force, let's say number 4, and red storm surge warnings. There's a lot of you know, a lot of scales being used to warn people, especially if you're in a direct path of the typhoon. That's why we experience. That's what we experienced when we were under a typhoon warning, warnings from our weather agency here in the Philippines.
But I'm curious to know, though, like I'm not saying PAGASA just specifically, but even other countries, when there's so many different levels, and for me, I think it makes more sense. I mean, I'm not saying that we've got to do what Miami does, but I like Miami's approach. Tropical storm watch, tropical storm warning, hurricane watch, hurricane warning. Very simple. It's going to be kind of bad in the next 40 hours. It's going to be kind of bad in the next 24 hours. No, it's going to be kind of bad in 40 hours, and it's going to be really bad in 24 hours. I mean, it's very, very simple to where people are like, hurricane's coming, tropical storm's coming. Boom, get the word out. Start preparing now. Yes, there are flood warnings and watches, there are tornado watches where they also get mixed in, but that's the local agency's focus to be able to coordinate those things. But guess what? This big thing is coming. Be ready. And that's simple. You don't have all these various different levels to worry about, well, is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Is it red, white, blue, or whatever color you want to choose? Is it typhoon yes, typhoon no? Tropical storm yes, tropical storm no. It's just very simple, to the point, done. And I think that would be much more helpful than, well, you have to remember that this level, this pink level here is like, minimum, and then you've got yellow, and then you got orange, and I'm like, it doesn't matter. Is it a typhoon or is it not? Boom. And I think
JMA kind of does that too, though.
What's that?
JMA does kind of do that per prefecture. They issue these warnings for Japan only, though, and that's the downside
Right.
of it. And it's all in Japanese, the warning information. It'll say that in 48 hours you're going to see 200-kilometer-per-hour winds. But yeah, I agree with you on that. And it's not only PAGASA that does that with the signal, because I think one of the things I dislike about the signal force levels compared to, let's say, a tropical storm or typhoon warning, is that, let's say right now we are in signal force 2 or 3. That doesn't tell me if it's going to go to 5. The same thing with Hong Kong and their thing. If we got a 6 level, it doesn't tell me if we're going to go to 7 or 8. It just tells me that we're going to be seeing a 6 possibly. So yeah, that's one reason I do like the typhoon watches, because that says we are going to be in a typhoon eventually in 48 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I'm not pointing at just PAGASA. I'm talking about any other agency, because there are many other agencies that use multiple signal levels or multiple warning levels when it's really just about, is it a typhoon? Is it a tropical storm? And I think that that's really what will help out in getting to people. If you say, typhoon's coming, get ready, people are like, oh crap, there's a typhoon coming. Okay, let's start moving. But if it's like, well, we're in level 2, or we're in a pink, or we're in an orange, or yeah, people are like,
well, this is another thing that goes back to, and I'm sure, Ray, you can definitely agree with this. You were talking, I mean, when I talked to James and Josh when they were there in Tacloban during Haiyan, when people were saying, okay, we got a typhoon coming, a lot of times that gets lost too, and I think that's one reason why PAGASA does do the levels. I mean, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate for them too, because one reason why they do the levels is because when people say, hey, we got a typhoon coming, a lot of people kind of go, you know, it's a typhoon.
Yeah, I would say in my opinion, what happened in Tacloban during Typhoon Haiyan, why there are a lot of people were not aware of that warnings from PAGASA is that people are used to typhoons. People are used to extreme weather, especially in Leyte and Samar. So that's why they just ignore that warning sometimes when just before the worst of the storm came, and it becomes too late, and that's why there are so many people that left suffering from the aftermath of the typhoon.
And that might actually be something different with the Atlantic, at least, is that because in the Atlantic, let's be honest, the U.S. doesn't get hit as often with hurricanes as they do in the Philippines. So when you say a hurricane's coming, it's wall-to-wall media coverage, and people really do get ready. People get out of the way. People start evacuating. They get in their car and they drive 100 miles inland, because it only happens like once. I mean, how often, if let's say you lived in Miami, Florida, when's the last time was Miami hit by a good typhoon? Do we have to go back to Andrew, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, people, their ears perk out. And I noticed this, and specifically with the American military living here in Okinawa, you say typhoon, they're probably the loudest, most vocal people, because it doesn't happen as often. And I think that might be another thing there in the Philippines, and one reason why we have the different warning levels. But
if I twist that around, then we can say that's saying then it, like for example, the U.S. when it comes to tornado watches and warnings, we should grade those in the tornado alley because it happens all the time, versus the coast where it doesn't happen as often. So we should grade those. Just because the frequency or the expectations may be, in a sense, oh, we've seen it before, doesn't mean that the simplification of the process should not happen. Because if the people at home are not getting the message that something is about to go down, the warning system is not going to be as effective. You want to make sure that the warning system lets people know. If people say, I'm used to a typhoon's coming, I'm staying here, that's their decision, that's their responsibility. But the responsibility of the agencies is to say, look, there is something coming, get ready. Some people's thought process of getting ready is, okay, I'm good, we know it's coming, versus, oh, we got to get out of the way. That's up to the individual responsibility. The agency can't be responsible for that. The agency has to be responsible for saying, wink, wink, there's something coming, get out of the way. You know, I think that's where my thought process comes from. The agency can't really handle each individual person, because then you're going to put out individual warnings for each person. It doesn't work that well.
Mm, that's right.
All right.
There is a level of responsibility on the individual to be warned. Now, if the agency fails to warn, then that's the problem. But the agency is saying, look, it's coming. Be ready. And the people are saying, oh, it's coming. They have to decide from there if they're going to get out of the way or not.
All right. Well, on that note, let's start wrapping it up here. I didn't really want to go up to an hour on this show, which so you guys, one by one, what do you think? Basically, let's talk about back to the main topic. Who is the official typhoon agency in the Western Pacific? As far first, who is the official agency? What agency would you check first? And third, how about if there's a storm hitting your area where you live right now, which one are you going to kind of go for? And or how about this? Which one would you recommend? Because we're all in the weather, and I know the answer is going to be we all look at every single. We look at all the detailed information. For me, official agency in the Western Pacific is JMA. If we're talking solely on track, I would have to say either JMA or JTWC for the entire Western Pacific. And if there was a storm about to impact the Tokyo area, I'm going to go with JMA, hands down. The information they put out for Japan specific is there's no one else specifically any better as far as Japan-specific storm systems. Ray, what about you?
Well, I would say the official weather agency would be definitely JMA, Japan Meteorological Agency. In terms of intensity forecast and also the track specifically on a storm that is tracking across the Western Pacific. But if the storm will threaten the Philippines, I would say that PAGASA will have the responsibility of issuing warnings for people, for Filipinos in the Philippines. So yeah, I would say enough.
All right, and Mike?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we got to have a consolidated voice for the regionalized for the region. It's JMA. For the local impacts, that's going to be your local agency, whether it's JMA in Japan, or if it's PAGASA in the Philippines. What I do want to see, though, is more direction from the WMO and consistency. One thing I wanted to toss out there, prior to the show, I was kind of flipping through some of my manuals and all that, and it just blew my mind how the vagueness of their direction is in terms of, you mentioned earlier about the wind speed. How 1 minute, 10 minute, here's some, I didn't realize China uses a 2-minute wind speed for their cyclones. And we have so many different, methods, and the guidance in the handbook from JMA is completely, it's all over the place. So we need to have a straightforward answer, straightforward guidance from the WMO.
All right, Jonathan?
Oh, I guess we're all kind of going in the same direction here. I mean, official, I think the term is a misnomer in the sense that it's like, this is the official hands-down agency. But I'd say the agency responsible for discussing the big picture and following the big picture of what's happening in the typhoon world for this part of the world is JMA. And that's who I'll contact, I mean, in terms of looking up information, finding out. But when it comes to impact and warnings in terms of, look, this is going to affect you, it is the local agency of that country. So for me here in Tokyo, it's JMA. But for Koreans, it'll be KMA. For South Koreans, it'll be KMA. For in the Philippines, it'll be PAGASA. And so I would say definitely there are a lot of coordination issues that need to be worked out. There needs to be consistency in terms of how we run the information in terms of say, look, this is happening, so the local agency needs to coordinate, or the JMA needs to coordinate with the local agency to get the word out and be able to process through that. So I would say big picture JMA, localized picture, the local agency.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that's kind of going to wrap it up then. Thanks, guys. And yeah, I think that the big thing we were going to take away from this discussion today is Yeah, there needs to be more coordination. There is the official agency, as Jonathan, you just put it. It is kind of a misnomer when you say official, and sometimes it really does drive me personally crazy as well when people say this is the official agency for a typhoon in the Philippines. PAGASA, bam. But there still needs to be more coordination. Between all the agencies, and not to say NHC is the perfect one, but yeah, I think that we should that should be a model. Anyways, it's something with the Typhoon Committee. I would give it an arm and a leg to sit in the Typhoon Committee to see how it's discussed and everything, but that'll be a discussion for it. So if anybody's watching from the Typhoon Committee, you got 4 guys right here that would love to join in and discuss with you about how stuff is done out here. And I think as far as a Western Pacific perspective, we probably talk the most with people being impacted by storms from different countries, not just one particular country. But that's the big thing about this group, is that we talk with everybody from different areas, so you kind of get that broad perspective on anything, and that's one reason why we're having this chat here today.
I'm surprised I didn't have to bring out my prop here. I had my prop waiting here, but we didn't get into a fight where I needed to bring it out.
Well, unfortunately, we are all kind of agreeing on everything. So
JTWC is the best. Everybody should use JTWC.
Yeah, people were wondering. The prop was some pair of boxing gloves. So, but we didn't have to duke it out in here, so I think we're okay.
Yeah, that's the that's the big thing, is that because the big thing, and check this out, guys, if you want to go to the Facebook and check out Pacific Typhoon Season on the Facebook group, also Western Pacific Weather, but that Facebook group gets really vocal, and one reason why we're doing this for episode 1 on the wonderful world of weather. Once again, I mentioned this at the beginning of our little cast here. This is the wonderful world of weather, and we're going to try to do this once a week with a different topic. So if anybody else wants to join in on these Google Hangouts, Ray, thank you very much for jumping in on the Hangout here. I'm happy more people came in. If you guys want to do this next week, please just let us know. You can check it out, the link on that Facebook group. But also in the past, we've brought up the same conversation. You can just kind of whisper the official agency, and that group just lights up with people kind of throwing a fisticuffs about who is the official agency or not. So yeah, and next week I'm not sure. I'm actually going to try to put out a schedule of what we're going to be doing here as far as the next several weeks. Discussions. Would you guys got any ideas? Well, I got you here, and if anybody's on the YouTube right now, any thoughts on what would be a good discussion?
Okay.
Not off the top of my head, but if anyone out there has any ideas, definitely let us know, because we'd love to be able to tackle any. And maybe we'll have a discussion where we're going to have to bring out the boxing gloves and then duke it out. But yeah, just let us know if there are any topics. I don't have anything right off the top of my head. I think running through this one right now.
One thing we basically spent the most of this conversation vice the official typhoon agency is one thing we should probably talk. I think would be a great topic would be warnings, specifically for areas. The specific type of warnings. Also, this was another thing that got heated in that group the other day. Different typhoon seasons. What is a typhoon season? I don't know why that got heated really fast. We also got the El Nino coming up. That would be another good conversation. There's a couple ideas like that. I don't know.
Well, you got the next 3 weeks planned up. We got a whole month already in the bag right there.
But yeah, there's a few things, and I'll put actually a thing out on the group there and ask people what they would like to talk about, because there's always going to be somebody with a really good idea. So.
And you probably already mentioned this, Robert, but we want, of course we've got, the meteorologists in the group, but we like to have others coming into the actual hangout conversation as well. So we would love to be able to have you in on the discussion that way, and not just through the chat, but also in video as well. So. Yeah,
I actually highly encourage that, because as you can see with us, we're all really smart with weather. So.
Well, I'm not, but the rest of you are.
Well, you know what I mean, though, is that when you get somebody coming in who's kind of new to the topic, there's a lot of questions, a lot more debate, and it makes the conversation a little bit more lively, I do believe. So, yeah, we'll check that out next time. All right, though. Thanks again for watching, everybody, here on the YouTube channel. If you watched the whole hour-long update, thank you very much. And yeah, sorry if we bored you. I see some comments coming through here. That 12345J guy, he's just having a whole fun time with the comment section. I hope you're enjoying yourself. All right. See you guys later.
Okay. Bye.